Welcome to Beyond the Art, where creativity knows no bounds and innovation takes center stage. Join us on a captivating journey through the realms of the Native American art world, exploring the untold stories, inspirations, and the sheer brilliance that fuels the world of Indigenous artistry. Well, welcome to Beyond the Art. Today we have Jeremy Dennis, a member of the Shinnecock Nation tribe of Indians. Welcome, Jeremy.
Thank you for having me.
Absolutely. Well, why don't we just get right off to the start? And what initially inspired you to delve into photography and art? Was there a particular moment or experience that ignited this passion in yours?
Um, well, all throughout my youth up until today, I've always had a interest. I always thought I had maybe some skills in the arts. So leading up to being a photographer, I did illustration, charcoal, pencil drawing, eventually oil, printmaking, and sculpture. And then finally, in a senior year of undergrad in college, I
Mhm.
finally did a 35 millimeter in darkroom. I remember I went to a very artsy high school, but I was so afraid of the camera. It was I think it was like a 4x5 or 8x10, and you had the hood and everything. So I
Right.
was so scared of using it that I failed my first photo class. But eventually, just out of completing my requirements for college, I took a photo class in the darkroom. Really bad at printing photos, so I went on to become a digital photographer, and that's what I continue to do today. But I do want to acknowledge my mother. Her name's Denise Silva Dennis. She also, of course, before me, went through the studio art education. She wanted to also be an artist, and so having a parent as an artist who's encouraging also kind of allows it, or it kind of permits you to pursue that path much easier.
Right. You have the support and infrastructure behind you and people to push you along the way.
Mm-hmm.
How does your heritage influence and shape your artistic vision?
Well, I'm from Shinnecock Nation. We're in Southampton, New York, in what's known as the Hamptons today. And
Right.
so I think a lot of what influences my work is what we have here on the Shinnecock territory each year. I believe in 2023, this was our 83rd annual Labor Day weekend powwow in a row since the 1940s. And so for me, this is just a wonderful time of the year. Ours is the largest on the East Coast. And it's just a huge gathering of nations in a place that otherwise remains in the margins, doesn't really get attention. Our stories don't really get told. And yet, for 4 days out of the year, it's just this overwhelming wave of support, recognition, celebration. And so, a lot of the work that I do as an artist tries to, I don't know what the best word or way to describe it, but trying to carry on the spirit of powwow all year long. So trying to
Mhm.
figure out like how do we create and maintain that connection between the outside world and our community. Just because we have about 600 tribal members on territory, maybe about 1,800 total who are descendants throughout the country or around the world. And so it is a very small community, but I think we have such an amazing story. And as an artist, there's just so many directions that you can go in, from our whaling ancestry and history, to our resilience, like how we've been able to stay here for over 10,000 years on our
Mhm.
Aboriginal territory, and just everything that our living relatives are doing today. So it's really amazing. It's an honor as a artist to sometimes go out in the world and represent Shinnecock, but it is in a unofficial capacity, of course.
So when you start creating something, you have a vision in your mind, is there anything in particular that you're trying to um, relay, or is there a story or a subject matter? I know a lot of your photography has addresses conflicts and situations, but is there something that you're trying to continue that theme and tell the audience?
Um, well, another family member I'm really inspired by is my older sister, Kelly Dennis. She's actually an attorney, but she went through the same like artsy high school and everything as me.
Mm.
So she does painting as a side thing. So when she was in college and moved on in her academic career, she always emphasized the need and the importance of Indigenous people taking up space, making ourselves known, getting what we need to survive by any
Mhm.
means necessary. So the first ever work that I created as the artist that I include in my portfolio today is around Native American creation stories. And so this was such a important series for me. I don't think I realized the importance as I was first making it, but growing up on a very small Indian reservation, you're pretty much rendered to um, believe that you're supposed to be within these boundaries, that you don't really
Right.
belong
Right.
anywhere else. And so when you look at creation stories, these are unfortunately dismissed as fairy tales and myths and legends, but really these explain where we come from.
Mhm.
We as Indigenous people have an undeniable connection throughout our landscape beyond the bounds of the reservation. And so for me, it's such an important thing to celebrate and share. And it is just something that is a reality that we face. There's a lot of cousins, they are born on Shinnecock. They spend their whole lives on Shinnecock, not really going out into the world. And so by looking at these stories, you're able to sometimes pinpoint exactly where our ancestors once had these amazing experiences
Correct.
and just try to imagine like how can we once again take part in maybe ceremonies or other type of things out in the world. And so that is something that connects with storytelling, one of our
Mhm.
oldest art forms, and the land. And I think in more recent years, the maybe the thesis behind my work is all around just like the land back movement in many different indirect ways. So it's all about reflecting on growing up in the Hamptons, where real estate and development are the biggest industries,
Right.
and how we live in a disparity where we as Indigenous people want to preserve as much as possible and regain and resteward the land. And so it's all about, in many ways, just looking at the land and how does that um, remind people of Shinnecock people. So one of the projects that I've recently started working on is called the Sacredness of Hills, and it's based on one of our local sacred sites called Sugarloaf Hill. It's one of 7 in the area, these different hilltops that have ceremonial and sacred importance because these hilltops were traditionally our cemeteries. And
Mhm.
so, of course, when you live in a real estate economy,
Right.
people want to build directly on top without any
Right.
sensitivity. And so we were lucky back in 2021 to work with Roger Waters of Pink Floyd, of all people. He contributed over $5 million, and we finally purchased and preserved the site after 30 years. But really, the art that I'm trying to do is all about getting the public to have a common understanding of these important sites and how, like when you're driving in your car, you're looking to a peak or a distinct hill, and hopefully people will continue to understand that these sites are important to Shinnecock and they need to be preserved and not built upon. It's all
Correct.
about land back in many different ways.
It's amazing. Can you share what your insights into your creative process and how do you approach conceptualizing and executing a project or series?
Oh, sure. I'm always influenced by artists who pull from text in order to create an image. So it's
Mhm.
all about finding a really important idea or a really important story that has been overlooked and needs to be told, and creating an image for that. And so usually it's a pinnacle moment or like a moment of
Mhm.
transformation that you're trying to depict. And even though you can't immediately get that from the viewing of the image, it's done in a compelling way that hopefully the viewer will spend time with it, maybe do their own research, or the image is accompanied by a wall text. And so it's really just about like finding texts, being inspired by that, and then creating sketches and working with volunteers to stage this imagery. And so one of my 2016 projects, it's called On This Site, Native Long Island. And this is really the like the emphasis of this text into imagery practice. And so it's looking at Long Island, New York's from Brooklyn to Montauk, all of the site-specific Native history. And so, of course, it starts with research. Then I try to pinpoint where these histories took place, and then go out and travel and do landscape photography. And then I package each one of these on a digital format. So it's an interactive map. And then really it's up to the public to, at their own pace, go through this content. So hopefully starting at home, looking at their own backyard, and then kind of getting this impression that there's just so much information that we've never been taught. And hopefully it'll be free and accessible for future generations.
So what inspires and motivates you in creating the series and artwork that you do?
Well, a lot of it's just growing up Indigenous or growing up Shinnecock, just the idea that I think our history is so amazing, but sometimes when you ask the outside world, the very fact that we've been here for so long becomes a reason for people to dismiss us. Because, like, especially when we look at social media and we look at the news nowadays, it's all about being up to date, like what's the latest thing, how is it relevant, and like sometimes catastrophes happen and something else happens, and then you move on after a day or a week. And so when you talk about histories that took place 500 years ago or 3,000 years ago, it's very hard to get people's attention. And so the work that I try to do tries to find that link between two communities. And so part of the motivation behind that is just because in the Hamptons, there's so much segregation that you can actually just point on the map and pick out people's race, economic situations. And that's also true when it comes to social circles. And so it's all about we as modest means trying to be an example of how you can build community, even though we're next to like the top 1%ers, people who don't even want us to be here and have been taking over.
So you talk about storytelling. How do you see the intersection of traditional storytelling and the contemporary art in your work?
Well, the thing that I, as time went on, working on depicting creation stories, I kind of got the understanding or the permission to kind of see them as being dynamic. And so the storytelling is all about honoring the people who originally told them. We all understand that when you tell a story, you kind of keep that person and memory alive. And so the other thing about that is, like, every time someone tells it, it's always different. And then the audience determines different elements as well. And so you don't really have to stay within the exact details of the original text or the original way that you're being told the story. And so by that example alone, these no longer become like something very old or something in the past. They just become content and material for whenever you want to tell them. And so I think that that's a really amazing way to look at creation stories. The other thing that I try to do is, especially working with history, is try to blur the lines between oral stories and historic narratives, like things written down. So I think that they're both legitimate, they're both human experiences, and I try to maybe help people with their imagination to see both of them as being legit.
In your opinion, what role does art play in advocating for Indigenous rights and promoting cultural understanding?
Well, when it comes to Indigenous art, I think it's just so amazing. Like the fact that it exists at all, the fact that we're able to have the lifestyle to move on from simply surviving and being resilient
Correct. Right.
to being able to just celebrate our culture. And so receiving support, that's always an amazing thing. And I think no matter what, Indigenous art, because of that reason, is always political. There's always a message. There's always many different layers of meaning. And so I always think of artists in the role of trying to persuade the public to learn something new, to have a new appreciation for Indigenous art and our
Hmm.
contributions, and really just the idea of acknowledging our continued existence through cultural production. So, not just things in museums, things that are living as well. Mhm.
Has there been challenges or misconceptions you face as an Indigenous artist?
Um, I think the biggest thing for me, just because I look a lot at social justice work and criticizing like local policies and um, our neighbors here in the Hamptons. And so commercial success as an artist is always a difficult thing in that case.
Mm.
So I would say most of my work is sustained through like local and nationwide museums who don't
Mhm.
have the need to sell your work in order to make it or label it successful. A lot of times, museums are working in the forefront of culture and looking for new ideas to push society. And so that's where I've found my success for the most part. But at the same time, there's only like a finite amount of museums, and people are opening and doing gallery shows all the time, and especially in New York. Like if you want to work with like the Met or the Guggenheim and all these other things, you need to prove yourself over decades sometimes.
Mhm.
And
True.
so you really can't be successful as an Indigenous artist if you don't subscribe to like making copies of something that's always been sellable or doing something that one thing I noticed growing up on the east end of Long Island is everyone loves abstract expressionism or abstract sculpture and visual art. And so, as someone who does representational work, I think sometimes the audience doesn't know where to start, or they think it's not for them, or they think it's just for Shinnecock audiences.
Right.
And so, there is a discomfort in both acquiring this work because people are asking themselves, like, should I be the one to own it? And then the other is wondering if they're the ones being criticized. And then the other is simply the idea that for many viewers, this was the first they're even learning about Shinnecock. And so to even get into the message of the work, I think that's also a big ask.
Well, tell us a little bit about some of your pieces and creations. And was there any piece that surprised you at the response it received? And on the reverse of that, was there any piece that you're surprised of the lack of response it got?
Oh, sure. Well, my favorite series that I hope to work on soon is called Rise. It's RISE, and it's all about indigenous reoccupation of ancestral land. So it involves a lot of self portraiture in traditional regalia and working with different Caucasian volunteers to stage. Well, you do have to just see it yourself, but I'm going to try to describe it. It's kind of like zombie apocalyptic imagery,
Got it. Okay.
replacing the undead with indigenous figures or self portraiture.
Mhm.
And for me, it's all about in pop culture, it's like the undead coming back to haunt the living. But for us, it's a supposed vanished race who never really disappeared. And so sometimes the imagery is just that. And it's showing like indigenous people rising up and coming
Mhm.
together. Others are based on the fear of Native Americans. Just this idea of like we in popular imagination think that natives are no longer here, or if they
Correct.
are here, they're in Oklahoma or the Southwest, and definitely
Right.
not New York State. And so sometimes when people are confronted by our existence, it becomes a threat to like their land, their homes, their operations.
Mhm.
And I think they should be afraid in that way. And
It
so
should be rattled a little bit.
yeah. So that's the next stage to maybe get New York State, at least in my context, to relocate people. But I think the art is just about that fact of like
Mhm.
who's on the land, how's the land contested, and just constantly like poking people with that message. So the imagery that from that series that I was surprised by its success is myself. I'm in this very luxurious Hamptons pool, and I worked with a friend and volunteer who is in like a bathrobe or in a nightgown type thing, and they're just holding um, a cup of coffee on the edge of the pool, and
Mhm.
it's a piece titled "I Could Stand Here All Night." And so it's this kind of like this eternal battle of two people who claim the same land, and it asks the viewer like who really belongs. And so it's a little bit uncomfortable because with us in the Hamptons being such a small population, pretty much anyone who sees this image is kind of being pointed at and asked
Right.
about their context.
And your projects often involve community engagement, or you work with others in collaboration. How important is collaboration and community involvement in your creative process?
Oh, it's yeah, the utmost important, just because portraiture is what I started out with even before being a photographer. I was
Mhm.
doing people's illustrations in pencil, and that was really enjoyable. But I was such a shy person growing up that portraiture became a way to like break out of the shell and make friends. And so many of the friends that I have today probably wouldn't have formed if not for that practice. The other thing I think a lot about is the Teen Vogue article. I think it's titled "Invisibility is a Modern Form of Racism Against Native Americans," and it came up with different statistics from 2015 about how staggering it is. Um, I forget which state it is, but something like two-thirds of Americans in that state didn't know a single Native American or that Native
Hmm.
Americans still existed. And so by doing
Interesting.
this collaborative work between communities, you're slowly, maybe like a decimal at a time, undoing that fact. And
Mhm.
so even though the work antagonizes white audiences, it also shows and builds friendships and connections.
In your process in creating your series, how long does that take you to start from setup,
Um,
creation, and actually creating the art itself?
a lot of the work that I do is so modest that I just have, for the most part, my camera on a tripod. I have maybe one or two off-camera lights, and a lot of it's just guerrilla style. So, like, set it up, you're done in 30 minutes. I know most photographers like the proper way is to get permits, like block off the sidewalk and everything.
Right.
But I like that style because usually I plan it out so much that you can just like go out, do it real quick before anyone even notices or understands what's going on.
So do you have a plethora of ideas that you wanna, start creating and having, I guess, in a binder in the back of your file cabinet in your head that you wanna
Oh,
yeah?
yeah, definitely for all of my projects on my website. Those are kind of like endless projects with so many ideas. I think the reason I have so many ideas is I pull a lot from art history, just like compositions and things that would make sense in my work.
Mhm.
And part of the reason is because I look a lot at like biblical storytelling and how artists were so instrumental during like the Renaissance and when the Catholic Church was much more influential. And so it's a lot of thinking about the disruption and the
Mhm.
centuries of colonization and how artists were freely creating their work. Meanwhile, indigenous people in North America were being decimated. And so I think a lot about what would our art form have looked like, or what stories what we have been telling, if not for that colonization. And so I think a lot about the 16th 17th and 18th century paintings in Europe and sometimes in America, and how those could be remixed into an indigenous style. The other reason I do that is just because, like I was mentioning before, we're so far removed from popular imagination, and by remixing popular art, you're able to like enter yourself into canon and create conversations between like master artists or people who are already in museums, and it makes you wonder like why isn't this art also in the museum? Very similar.
Mm-hmm. How do you balance authenticity with storytelling in your compositions?
uh, I think the biggest thing is like it's happening lesser and lesser as I'm showing my work.
Mm-hmm.
But I think the authenticity comes with recognizing like where these texts and stories come from. So I always try to emphasize having some sort of explanation or like where you can read up more if
Mm-hmm.
you're curious about the image. And so one thing that sometimes happens when you're showing in a gallery is it's just the image. There's like no name, there's no title, there's no story. Like it's even sometimes hard to find like the paperwork to give you an explanation. And
Right.
so that's one of the dangers with especially native imagery, because people come with like if it's an older person, maybe they come with stories from summer camp or from their Boy Scouts, and they impose a narrative onto the work. Whereas like everything that I work on, there's like texts and texts and texts of things that should be changing your mind and should be educating you. And so I had a show recently in Lower Manhattan where that was the case. I have some of my works at the MTA Arts in Brooklyn, and those also are just the images. And I do hope in the future that I'm just able to maintain authenticity through like saying what are the tribal affiliations of these stories, like who was the one who told the story, like what is the entirety of it. And so
Mm-hmm.
that's something I'm working on.
You talked about doing it guerrilla style. Do you conceptualize before you actually go out and start shooting? Do you have like a storyboard or something written down, or you just, like you said, go at it and what it becomes is what it becomes?
Oh yeah, I just have like hundreds of ideas, and I have a digital notebook. And so
Mm-hmm.
sometimes when I'm working with a volunteer, sometimes we just meet outside. Sometimes we meet at their private residence, and it's kind of a happenstance of like if they have like a piano, or if they have like a pool, or if they have like a kitchen island or something like that. I'm able to search those keywords in my idea book and
Right.
basically kind of give them a list of images that we could potentially work on and collaborate on, and in that way it becomes a collaborative process rather than
Mm-hmm.
just like asking them to step in as almost like props. So it's a lot of consent and permission, and that's important too because so much of the images are like so vulnerable. Sometimes you're playing someone else, someone you probably wouldn't associate with, and so I think there's a lot of like theatricality and convincing that goes into it.
Do you think a lot of the compositions and pieces that you created have given a better understanding to the historical or cultural narrative of the Shinnecock or Indigenous people to the non-native?
Oh, I think so. Definitely. Um, I have a series called "Nothing Happened Here," and hopefully people will look it up. But it's these white individuals who have arrows impaled in their bodies, and they're not in physical pain. It's
Mhm.
supposed to represent this like mental anguish of carrying the shared burden of our country's history. It's the fact that colonization has happened, genocide has happened, and there's never been any meaningful reconciliation or land
Right.
back. And so it's something that's supposed to represent like a to-do list or something that is supposed to reverse this pain. And so with this body of work, sometimes I do this with volunteers, and when we wrap up and pack up the gear, they start to acknowledge or confess that they understand like their involvement in the subject matter and how it's is almost like uncomfortable because like you don't want to deal with this. Like the whole point of
Right.
this nothing happened to your project is not dealing with these traumatic memories and histories. And so it's almost as if it's activating something that leaves such an impression. So it's like a cycle of experiences.
Right. So you mentioned some of the places that you had current exhibitions. Are you represented anywhere nationally? And what's on the forefront for you exhibiting new pieces?
Um, well, for the longest time, I would even say since 2020, a lot of the work that I've been doing is like editing older projects that I haven't had time to do.
Mhm.
I don't have any current representation, but that might be in the works with the gallery in Lower Manhattan. That's Acon Gallery. It's AICON. But I think we're just going to experiment, see if my work has viability. Um, I think up to this point, commercially, I've not really had a lot of sales or like big gallery show sales. And so that's one thing we're just going to sample. We have like a 12-month, um, I guess, agreement. So
Mhm.
that's something that we'll try out. But for the other work that I'm doing, I do have a planned residency for UCross. That's in Wyoming for next year. So I'll
Mhm.
see what that space looks like and work on one of my projects. And then another one, Cittadella in Italy, that might be in late fall of next year as well. So it's yeah, sometimes it's a little bit stressful to have so many ideas and not be working on them.
Hey, but the future is bright for you, Jeremy.
Oh yeah, just need more time. Yep.
Yeah, yeah. So what pieces are you working on currently?
In my portfolio, um, I think at the top is the Rise project
Mhm.
because, like, when I go to the Metropolitan and I go to the painting section, and I'm just like constantly getting reference material for that, and that's something that is an interesting project because it's just the simple question of when will Indigenous people get their land back? And so I'm hoping that even though this is like my number one passion project, just because of the imagery and like the absurdity and humor of it all, I hope one day that this project will become irrelevant and we'll just move on from
Right.
having this disagreement about land stewardship. And so that's on the forefront. And a lot of the work that I do is interconnected. And so I mentioned the On the Site project from 2016. That's something that I received major support from a national nonprofit called Running Strong for American Indian Youth. And so that's something that kind of informs all of my other projects because as artists, we always wonder like what's on the to-do list or what's next
Right.
or like what should I be working on. But this is a project that has like a 10,000 year scope in history. It's 120 miles of width of landscape to work with. And then there's 13 indigenous communities that both are included historically and today. And so it's all about how do you encapsulate that? Maybe it branches off into even more projects. That's what has already happened. And so
Mhm.
it's something that's constantly generating things to do.
What advice would you offer to emerging Indigenous artists navigating the art world and seeking to share their cultural narratives through their work?
Um, well, a lot of the work that I've done in the more photojournalism realm is thanks to community involvement, sharing the stories of other tribal members and other relatives. And so, my advice is to try to engage as much as possible in your tribal community, if possible, and pay attention to the messages, the aspirations, the needs of the community, because every community has a need. And as artists,
Mhm.
we're supposed to be responding to that and expressing that and through our art honor and preserve those messages and I try to do that as much as possible And I think because of that, sometimes support comes in. Sometimes people who have resources are able to transfer them into the community. And so I think being a Indigenous artist is such a privilege because here at Shinnecock, we have things like coastal erosion. Like we should all be
Mhm.
focusing on that. Some of our homes are falling apart and have mold and other issues. So we could all be like carpenters. That's probably more
Right.
important than art. And then just basic needs of like utilities and food. And so being an artist, despite all this, you kind of have to stay in tune with everything else, and that keeps you modest.
Is there a large pool of Shinnecock artists? Is there a community, art community locally for you?
Oh yeah, definitely. There's so
Yeah.
many different Shinnecock artists working in many different mediums,
Mhm.
and I try to convince people more and more to say that they're an artist, like make a social media and website for themselves. Just because sometimes people who drum or people who dance or sing, they don't really see themselves as artists, even though these are among our oldest art forms. And
Correct, you're right.
so I envy those and their skills, um, just because photography is something new. It's like
Mhm.
it's not something that's traditional, and it's been used against us in many different ways. And so, one thing that's exciting for next year is as part of Moz House here on Shinnecock. This is the art nonprofit that I founded. We have funding for a all-inclusive Shinnecock art show, and so we'll try to reach out to as many different people who want to contribute a piece, and hopefully create a booklet and kind of create a timestamp of what Shinnecock art looks like now. Just because
Fantastic.
it is always sad when, especially people in the Hamptons or Southampton, our closest town, they say like, "I like your art. Are there any other Shinnecock artists?" And like it should be much easier to find other tribal
Right.
members.
Tell us about your nonprofit that you started.
Well, Moz House, the full name is Moz House and BIPOC Art Studio. We took a old family home, my grandparents' home built in the 1960s, and turned it into a communal art space today. And so this is a home that I grew up in the 1990s, but over time it just became so decayed. The
Mhm.
utilities didn't work, there were holes in walls. And so the house sat vacant for 5 years before we started. And so it was just without heat, no electricity, raccoons were living inside. But when the pandemic struck, we finally had time to focus and try to save it. And so we ended up doing a GoFundMe campaign that raised enough to make it livable after refurbishing. And really, because of that, we had over 400 people contribute. And
Wow.
so, yeah, any other way that wouldn't have been possible. And so instead of just turning it into my private home and studio, we now operate as a arts nonprofit. And so we have a communal library. You can see some of the books behind me.
Right.
Over 500 of the books are Native American content. And beyond that, we have a residency program for artists of color. We have free weekly workshops. We have 2 month at a time exhibits in the front of the house. And so these are all just samples of some of the projects that we do in such a small, re outfitted house. And so there's a lot of different reasons we started Moz House, but one of the reasons is our tribal museum. It's also been closed for about 6 years at this point. And so there's just no way for like schools to engage with Shinnecock or for the general
Mhm.
public to know that we still have like a voice or like cultural objects, and we continue making art. And so we hope that one day that museum will also be open, and we'll have like a ecosystem of art and culture and eventually tourism, jobs, and many other things.
Fantastic. Well, what else is on the horizon for you, Jeremy? You got a
Um,
lot going on there.
Probably a lot of projects and things in the works, but I'm hoping to make it to the Venice Biennale to Jeffrey Gibson's representing the United States. So I
Exactly,
think that's the
yeah.
place to be. So hopefully we'll all be there and celebrate.
Absolutely. I'm hoping to be there as well. Well, is there anything else you'd like to share or promote
Um,
and let our audience know about you and your art?
I would say it currently, if audiences want to see my art, the MTA show at Brooklyn is up until February of next year, and Ma's house as well has some of my art on view throughout the house. So we're open by appointment here in the Hamptons, about 2 hours east of New York City. So those are the main things for now.
Well, Jeremy, it's been a pleasure to have you on on our show, and I'm grateful for your time with us today.
Oh, well, thank you for speaking with me today, and have a good rest of your day.
Much success to you. Thank you, sir. Thank you for embarking on this artistic journey with us. Keep exploring, keep creating. Until we meet again, let your imagination soar beyond the art. Subscribe to our YouTube channel and follow us on your preferred podcast platform.